Today we're going to be talking about the basic structure and function of the lungs. Our ability to inhale oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide is a fundamental process that keeps us alive, and the complexity of the lungs' structure and function is truly remarkable. In this video, we will explore the anatomy of the lungs, how they work, and the important role they play in our respiratory system. So in this presentation, we will be talking about the basic structure of the lungs, the function of the lungs, how breathing happens, and the medulla oblongata. A short explanation on medulla oblongata, or the basics. So we'll start off with the lungs and what are lungs. So basically, the lungs are a vital or a pair of vital organs located in the chest, responsible for the process of respiration or breathing. They're part of the respiratory system, and their main function is to exchange gases, taking in oxygen from the atmosphere and releasing carbon dioxide from the body. The lungs, as we all know, are made up of millions of tiny air sacs called alveoli, which are surrounded by capillaries, and alveoli are the site of gas exchange. When we inhale air, air enters the trachea and then passes through the bronchial tubes, which branch out into smaller and smaller tubules until they reach the alveoli. Oxygen from the air will then diffuse through the walls of the alveoli and into the capillaries, which carries it to the rest of the body. Carbon dioxide, which is a waste product, is released from the body cells into the blood. It is carried by the blood to the lungs and then released into the air when we exhale. The lungs also play a role in regulating the body's pH balance by controlling the level of carbon dioxide in the blood. Additionally, they are involved in the immune system, producing substances that help to protect against infections and other harmful substances. The next slide, this is basically the gas exchange that happens between the alveoli and the capillaries. So as we mentioned earlier, that the alveoli is a site of gas exchange. So in the alveolus, this is the region where gas exchange actively happens by diffusion, as we all know. Diffusion is the movement of particles from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So basically, the gas oxygen in the alveoli will be of high concentration, obviously, because when we inhale, oxygen is inhaled with the air. So in the alveoli we'll have high concentration of oxygen, and in the capillaries, or in the blood in the capillaries, will have low levels of oxygen. So oxygen will diffuse from the alveoli into the blood capillary from high concentration to low concentration, and carbon dioxide will diffuse from the capillary into the alveoli, also moving from high concentration to low concentration, because the blood in the capillaries is a deoxygenated blood, so it will be rich in carbon dioxide and poor in oxygen. So oxygen will be taken in and carbon dioxide will be given out by diffusion. The next step, we're going to be talking about the respiratory system. So the main function of the respiratory system is to exchange gases. The respiratory system has many components or key features that is important in respiration, starting with the trachea. The trachea, also known as the windpipe, is a tube that connects the nose and mouth to the lungs. It is lined with cilia, which helps to trap and remove dust and other particles from the air. Next we have is the bronchi. The trachea divides into two main bronchi, one for each lung. The bronchi further divides into smaller bronchioles, which leads to the alveoli. Now the alveoli, also known as a microscopic structure, meaning it can't be seen by the naked eye. The bronchioles end in clusters of tiny air sacs called alveoli. These are the site of gas exchange in the lungs, where oxygen will be taken in and carbon dioxide will be released. The next we have is pleura. The pleura is basically a thin membrane covering the lungs. Its main function is to provide lubrication for the lungs. For instance, when we inhale and exhale, the lungs will expand. So as it expands and expands and shrinks or returns to its unstretched position, this pleura helps it to slip smoothly from the ribcage with each breath. Next we have is the diaphragm. The diaphragm is the dome-shaped muscle that separates the chest cavity or the thoracic cavity from the abdominal cavity, and it also helps in ventilating the lungs. It plays an important role in breathing by contracting and relaxing to help move air in and out of the lungs. Next we have is the blood vessels. Now the blood vessels are basically in contact with the alveoli. As you can see in this region here, the alveoli are in contact with a lot of blood vessels in order to make diffusion efficient. So the lungs are equipped with a rich network of blood vessels, including pulmonary arteries that carry the deoxygenated blood from the heart to the lungs, and the pulmonary veins that will carry oxygenated blood from the lungs back to the heart. The pulmonary circulation system is responsible for bringing blood to the lungs for oxygenation and removing carbon dioxide from the body. Overall, the anatomy of the lungs is designed to facilitate the exchange of gases between the air we breathe and the bloodstream. Air enters the lungs through the trachea and bronchi and is distributed to the alveoli, where oxygen is exchanged for carbon dioxide. The diaphragm and other muscles of the respiratory system work together to move air in and out of the lungs, while the pleura helps to reduce the friction and allow for smooth movement of lungs during breathing. The rich network of blood vessels in the lungs facilitates gas exchange and helps to maintain the balance of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the body. The next slide we're going to be talking about how breathing happens. So breathing basically means ventilation of the lungs, or inhalation and exhalation. Exhalation and inhalation are the two phases of breathing, which are controlled by the muscles of the respiratory system. Now the muscles of the respiratory system are the diaphragm and the rib muscles. So during inhalation, what happens is that when we inhale, the diaphragm, as we mentioned earlier, a dome-shaped muscle located at the bottom of the chest cavity, contracts and will move downward, while the muscles between the ribs will also contract to lift the rib cage. This increases the volume of the thoracic cavity and creates a negative pressure in the lungs or in the alveoli, meaning the pressure in the alveoli will drop in order for air to rush into the lungs through the nose or mouth from the environment into the lungs by diffusion. The air will travel through the trachea, then the trachea branches into two tubes called the bronchi or bronchus, and then bronchus will branch out into bronchioles, and finally the alveoli, which is the site of gas exchange. So this is what happens during inhalation. And during exhalation, the opposite happens. During exhalation, the diaphragm and the rib muscles will relax, and this will reduce the volume of the chest cavity or thoracic cavity, and this increases the pressure in the alveoli of the lungs, meaning the alveoli pressure will increase during exhalation, and during inhalation, the alveoli pressure will decrease. So exhalation is a passive process, meaning that it does not require the use of the respiratory muscles unless we need to exhale forcefully, such as during exercise or coughing. The process of inhalation and exhalation is controlled by the respiratory center in the brainstem, which monitors the levels of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the blood and adjusts the breathing rate and depth according to maintain a balance. During activities such as, let's say, exercise or stress, the respiratory center, or also known as the medulla oblongata, will increase the breathing rate and depth to provide the body with more oxygen and remove excess carbon dioxide. We will be talking about the medulla oblongata in the coming slides in more detail. So overall, inhalation and exhalation are vital processes that enables the body to take in oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, which are essential for sustaining life. Now in the coming slide, we'll be talking about the medulla oblongata. The medulla oblongata is basically, it is the respiratory control center of our body. It is composed of a group of neurons located in the medulla oblongata, which is part of the brain stem. It is responsible for regulating the rate and depth of breathing to ensure that the body is receiving adequate amounts of oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide. The respiratory control center receives input from chemoreceptors, which are specialized cells that detect changes in the levels of oxygen, carbon dioxide, and pH in the blood. When the levels of oxygen, let's say when the levels of oxygen in the blood are low or the levels of carbon dioxide are high, the chemoreceptors, what it does is that it will send signals to the medulla oblongata to increase the rate and depth of breathing or ventilation. Conversely, when the level of oxygen is high or the level of carbon dioxide is low, the respiratory control center will be signaled to decrease the rate and depth of breathing. Overall, the respiratory control center is a vital part of the body's respiratory system, ensuring that the body is receiving appropriate amounts of oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide in order to maintain balance in the blood. Example, the pH balance. The medulla oblongata is one of the main key factors that maintains the pH of the pH of the blood. Next, how breathing. Yeah, in this slide we're going to be talking about how breathing is regulated. So as we mentioned before, the respiratory control center is the medulla oblongata. Its main function is to detect the pH of the cerebrospinal fluid and send signals to the rib muscles or the respiratory muscles to contract, increasing the rate and depth of ventilation. So first off, as we all know that the normal blood pH is 7.4. When we exercise vigorously, what happens is that our metabolism speeds up and our body uses more oxygen, as a result releasing more carbon dioxide as a waste product. As the levels of carbon dioxide in the blood increases, the concentration of H plus ions will also increase, and this will lower the pH of the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. So what happens is that sensors in the medulla oblongata, as well as in the major blood vessels, for example, in the heart, in the vessels of the heart, will detect this change in pH and will send signals to the medulla oblongata. The breathing control centers in the medulla will respond by signaling the diaphragm or the rib muscles to contract to increase the rate and depth of breathing, and the excess carbon dioxide will be eliminated in the exhaled air. The pH of the blood will rise and our breathing returns to normal. So again, this is a diagram which basically summarizes the whole process of breathing regulation. So first of all, the nerve signals will trigger contraction of the rib muscles and diaphragm. The nerve signals, it will trigger the contraction of the diaphragm and the rib muscles to increase the rate and depth of ventilation so that more carbon dioxide is exhaled and more oxygen is inhaled. The breathing control center responds to the pH of the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid. The medulla oblongata will respond to the pH of the blood and the cerebrospinal fluid, and that will send appropriate signals to the diaphragm and rib muscles to increase the rate and depth of ventilation. That's pretty much it. Yeah, that's the end of this presentation. Thank you. Hope you all understood a bit about the basics of the lung, the basics of the structure and function of the lungs, and yeah, make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Thank you.